Hello. So this video is going to be a performance review of Roald Dahl's Matilda the Musical, performed at the Cambridge Theatre in London and directed by Matthew Warchus. I may be saying his last name wrong. I apologize if I am. Also, I'm sick, which is absolutely amazing for being here in London, leading a class for Literary London. Illness is exactly what you want in that situation. But I apologize. I'm going to sound gross in this video. I will try to keep that to a minimum. So, I say Roald Dahl's Matilda the Musical. It really kind of isn't. In that Roald Dahl wrote the novel Matilda, and then it was subsequently turned into a musical with the book by Dennis Kelly and music and lyrics by Tim Minchin. Sorry. So, this is kind of an interesting one for me because I was a kid when the film version of Matilda came out. I've actually never read the book. I don't think maybe as a kid I've read a Roald Dahl book, but I don't remember ever having read anything by Roald Dahl, actually. But I did see the movie a few times as a kid. But I haven't seen it probably for 25 years or so. So, it was sort of interesting to come to this musical having a familiarity with the story, but being really far distanced from that familiarity. And as an adaptation studies person, that's a really interesting experience personally for me, because one of the things that we often think about with adaptation studies is how recognizable a text is to the audience. And so for me as an individual, my own idiosyncratic experience was having a recognition of the general subject matter, but being quite separate from it. So the story of Matilda the Musical does vary slightly from the movie and from the film, and from the novel that originally inspired it. There's obviously a lot of similarities. Matilda is an extremely smart young girl. She goes to school having read probably hundreds of books, and not like just children's books, although she does seem to read children's books, but like very challenging adult novels as well, like Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment is one that she specifically mentions. It's an extremely difficult novel. I don't think I read that until I was in my 20s. But despite being, and she can do like fairly advanced mathematics in her head, all these things. Despite being incredibly smart, like, I don't want to use the term freak, but freakishly smart, Matilda is subject to ridicule and abuse by her parents, who are... So her dad is the most stereotypical used car salesman you could imagine, right down to his very bright green plaid suit, which in all honesty I thought was kind of awesome. And his big sort of 1950s teddy boy duck's ass haircut. Her mother is this very sort of chav style, obsessed with dancing, ballroom dancing, and she has this partner, this faux Italian partner named Rudolfo, and they just continually ridicule and abuse Matilda. When she gets to school, she, on the one hand, meets Miss Trunchbull, who is this very sort of large, imposing, authoritarian headmistress of the school, whose basic approach to education is that children's wills must be broken. On the other hand, she meets Miss Honey, who's this young, caring, very nurturing, but incredibly cripplingly timid teacher who recognizes Matilda's brilliance and tries to nurture her. Basically, she's the first person, if we ignore Mrs. Phelps, the librarian, who really is sort of... So, Mrs. Phelps is an interesting character because on the one hand, she is clearly an ally of Matilda, but Matilda also tells Mrs. Phelps that her parents love her and are proud of her. So Mrs. Phelps doesn't really know what's going on. She just really enjoys hearing Matilda tell her stories. But Miss Honey is the first adult in Matilda's life who recognizes and accepts her brilliance. So much of the story is pretty directly about child abuse, and there's a wide range of ways in which that plays out. And then finally, Matilda very rapidly develops telekinetic powers toward the end of the musical. And this was one thing that my students mentioned about this as well. The balance of the musical is very awkward because it is just really just at the end that Matilda develops telekinetic powers with no real preparation for that or indication that that's ever going to happen prior within the performance. So that happens, and Matilda uses her telekinetic powers, particularly after finding out that Miss Trunchbull has likely murdered Miss Honey's parents and has dispossessed Miss Honey of their house, taking it over for herself and keeping Miss Honey in poverty. So Matilda uses her telekinetic powers basically to defeat Miss Trunchbull and sort of drive her from school and compel her to give up Miss Honey's house, etc., etc. The Wormwood family, that's Matilda's parents. So Matilda's mother and father, Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood, her brother, who I think is called David, and Rodolfo, all come on stage, and they're basically like, we are going to Spain because Mr. Wormwood has basically defrauded the Bulgarian mafia, and now the Bulgarian mafia is coming after them. Matilda manages to persuade the leader of the Bulgarian mafia not to break her parents' legs, largely by speaking Bulgarian to him. So again, just absolutely amazing mind that she's got, etc., etc. And her reward for saving her parents from the Bulgarian mafia is basically that her dad allows her to remain there with Miss Honey. And that's basically the end of the musical. Happy ending. So the Cambridge Theatre production was generally, I thought, quite good. I really, really enjoyed it. And that's unusual for me because I'm not a big musicals person. Especially sort of big budget, like West End musicals, which is what Matilda is. But one of the things that I was quite impressed with the show was the ways in which they sort of balanced these sort of high energy, big personalities with these much more calm, reflective moments that I thought made the show work really, really well. So, for instance, there's a number called School Song, which is when Matilda and her classmates first arrive at school and they get this sort of terrifying introduction by the older students who are basically like, you're going to suffer here. This is worse than prison. Everything is going to suck. Don't expect to learn things. You will just, everything is going to be terrible. So it's kind of a downer of a song, but it is a legitimate critique in a way of, to a certain extent, this has been reformed, but of mass education systems that run on an economy of training all students to see things in the same ways, that there are correct answers and incorrect answers, etc., etc. But the thing that was really cool about it, actually, for me, for looking at it from the perspective of someone who does perform, just the sheer amount of coordination, choreography, and timing that goes into that show. Because there's one bit where the school gate, which is a movable set piece, has these sort of different sized squares. It's a sort of prison gate looking structure, but it has irregular sized squares. And they do this bit of School Song in which they run through the alphabet. And the song is written in such a way that they can hit every letter of the alphabet as part of the education that the new students were hoping to get. They hit every letter of the alphabet over the course of the song. And what happens is, from behind, performers will push letter blocks into the square holes of this gate. And as they do that, there are two performers who are climbing up the front of it, and they are leaping, basically, leap dancing from block to block. So as each new block goes in, they are interacting with it in some way. And it has to be incredibly difficult to coordinate that so effectively, because it really did work quite well. So that was actually super, super cool to see. And then the show runs on an economy of big personalities, of big characters, which is partly a function of this being more or less told from Matilda's perspective, and she is a child, even if she is like a massive intellect, she is still a child, and so the sort of big personality of her parents, played by Neil McDermott, who plays the father, and Tiffany Graves, who plays the mother, and even Rudolfo, played by Sam Lips. These sort of big personalities where they're loud and obnoxious and abrasive and taking up space on the stage. That's to a certain extent kind of a reflection of Matilda's juvenile worldview, her juvenile perspective on those around her, etc., etc. As is sort of the size and imposingness of Miss Trunchbull, played by Kieran Hill. And so you have these very big personalities, which really quite works well for a musical, because they can be very loud, they can be very fast, they can play in these very strong ways. But then you also have these moments of more sort of reflective quiet. And there's actually a number called Quiet, which Matilda sings by herself, where she stands slightly stage left, but downstage left-ish. And she's sort of lifted up on this pedestal of books, while the ensemble of school children, Miss Honey, played by Eve Norris, and Miss Trunchbull, played by Kieran Hill. I don't know if I said that already. I might have already said that. Doesn't matter. They are all doing sort of a slow motion bit in the back. And it is this strange moment, because it's Matilda recentering herself and sort of shutting out the outside world. And I didn't know, like, as I was watching it, I was having a bit of difficulty sort of figuring out exactly what it was we were seeing, whether this was a psychotic break, whether this was, say, a person with undiagnosed autism employing a coping mechanism, or what exactly it was. But this seems to be the moment in which Matilda's telekinetic powers emerge. But it's such a quiet song with the music primarily being these sort of low, very pleasant chimes, and the number primarily carried forth by Matilda herself singing. Incidentally, I'm not going to say the name of the performer who played Matilda. It's probably not a big issue because she's listed on the website for Matilda if you wanted to go check it out. But personally, I don't feel like it's a responsible thing to say the names of child actors, because I don't know, it's sort of an arbitrary distinction, but I feel like minimizing the exposure of underage people is probably a good thing. And so I as a general rule, don't tend to do that. So we get those sort of wonderful moments of quiet and sort of contemplative music that very much balance out the much more overt, loud noise. I don't want to sort of dismiss it, but the sort of noisy approach of much of the rest of the play, or musical rather. So the one criticism I do have of the musical is the casting of Kieran Hill as Miss Trunchbull. Hill himself did actually quite a good job with the part. He did really, really well. He was very funny and intimidating, and so that's exactly, I think, what you want for Miss Trunchbull. The issue that I have is more that Miss Trunchbull is consistently cast as a male actor playing a female role. Because there's a long history in theater, in movies, in, to a lesser extent, TV, etc., of villains being queer-coded. And especially for things like a comedy, and especially for things like a children's show, which Matilda very much is, having a queer-coded villain can contribute to that sort of sense of LGBT people being evil, which is an absolutely irresponsible thing to do. And so it's not necessarily that this production or this particular casting choice is a problem, but taken within a broad tradition of queer coding villains, it does contribute to that. And that is something that we should be cautious about.